All right, so in the interest of time, because we have a lot of great stuff to talk about today, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to task Jessica with continuing to let people in from the waiting room as we get going. Let's make sure I can get my slides to advance. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us today for this super exciting learning experience. Our speakers today have some fantastic insights to share with you as they share their experience developing and implementing a refrigerant management plan. And I want to thank Sustainable Hudson Valley for helping to spread the word about this event, and especially to Jessica DuPont for helping manage this Zoom webinar. So before we jump in, I wanted to give a brief introduction about Hudson Valley Regional Council. HVRC is one of 10 regional planning organizations in New York State and serves 7 counties: Dutchess, Orange, Putnam, Rockland, Sullivan, Ulster, and Westchester in the Mid-Hudson region. We help municipalities access and understand information and grants from the state and federal level and provide technical assistance on environmental and sustainability programs, economic development, materials management, and water resources. Our programmatic areas are funded by NYSERDA, the DEC, the Hudson River Estuary Program, the EDA, and EPA. Please feel free to reach out to us on any of these areas, and this work would not be possible without the annual support from our county government members, so thank you to our county governments. And as a quick note, I imagine that many of you have joined the call because of the Refrigerant Management Climate Smart Communities Action and or the Government Operations Greenhouse Gas Inventory Action. Here at HVRC, we are available to assist you with your Climate Smart Community certification applications. And for those of you joining us from outside the Mid-Hudson region, you can find your CSC coordinators on the Climate Smart website, or feel free to reach out to me and I can help connect you. And just quickly, this is our climate and clean energy team at HVRC. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, and all of our contact info can also be found on our website, hudsonvalleyregionalcouncil.org. So now what you are all here for, our presenters. We are excited to host Julie, the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston, Michael, the lead volunteer for New Yorkers for Cool Refrigerant Management, and Philip, an environmental specialist with the City of Kingston. After our presenters finish, Jessica from Sustainable Hudson Valley will briefly share information about a survey related to the refrigerant management plan and how Sustainable Hudson Valley was involved before opening the floor up for questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and Jessica and I will do our best to keep track of them throughout the presentation. And I'll now pass it off to Julie to share her screen and get started.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Can you just confirm that you can hear me and see my screen?
Yes, you are all set.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so proud to be part of this panel. And I'm going to walk you through how Kingston got involved in doing a municipal refrigerant management plan. I served, my role in this was the grant writer for the grant, the grant manager, and also the project manager. So the City of Kingston has had a history of trying to be a leader and doing a lot of good work in environmental work and sustainability, and we feel like we're doing a good job at that. And this latest refrigerant management plan is one in a long string of many plans that we've done here for the city, including natural resources inventories, resilience plans, open space plans, climate action plans, which all help us lead to action. And this is one of those gaps that we saw that we felt we needed to advance. So what helped us align to that? First was our climate action plan. We have had 2 climate action plans. The latest one was in 2020, which guides us out to 2030. And that plan set goals of greenhouse gas emissions reductions throughout our city government operations and citywide. It established and called out that buildings and facilities contribute emissions from heating and cooling. It called out specifically that vehicle air conditioning and refrigerant equipment can leak, causing emissions. And it called out that solid waste disposal, and we are a hauler here in the city of Kingston. We have our own sanitation division, including the large appliances that we collect from the public could be contributing to refrigerant emissions. So we had that plan and have that plan as a guide, and we also have the leadership in place to keep us going. The willingness of the community and our leadership to push the needle and to be an environmental leader. We were the first city in New York State to be a Climate Smart Silver certified community, and we want to continue to do that and hold up our certification. And we have a really robust Climate Smart Kingston Commission that has identified refrigerant management as a priority of theirs since 2019. So we decided to advance the City of Kingston Refrigerant Management Plan, and we did that with funding provided by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Climate Smart Communities Grant Program, and I'm going to walk you through that. This was in partnership with Sustainable Hudson Valley and New Yorkers for Cool Refrigerant Management, which are both present on the call today. First, the funding, as I mentioned, this was from DEC, and this was through the consolidated funding application back in 2022. So we applied for CFA funding in 22 for the Climate Smart Communities Fund. This comes out every year. You could do the same thing. Our entire project budget was $100,000 and the grant funded 50,000. So it's a 50-50 match. We had to provide 50%, which ended up being in this case $50,000. The $50,000 paid for the consultants, so Sustainable Hudson Valley and New York's for Cool Refrigerant Management, and collection fees. So this is a 5-year grant, and we're able to offset the fees when we collect refrigerant appliances from the public. We are able to pay for those through this grant. The local match has been my time, Phil's time, a number of other staff's time, and materials to help to get out outreach and a number of other things related to the project. The overall project goal was to create a comprehensive plan to address how the city manages refrigerants, how we purchase them, how we manage them, how we dispose of them, with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We wanted to focus on our municipal buildings, our fleet, and the appliances that we take in at our transfer station and curbside. These are the components of our project. And if you are going to do a project like this, I recommend these same components. This is universal on what really any good plan should have. This is not specific to Kingston. So an inventory first, what you have, how often you're going to update that inventory with a policy that you're going to create, a summary of the findings of what is found in your operations, in your fleet, in your procurement, in how you maintain things, in your disposal. So a summary of all those findings. A procurement policy is a deliverable coming out of this. How are we going to procure refrigerants moving forward? A maintenance policy. How will we maintain what we currently have? And will that be through reclamation, recycling, destruction? How is that going to happen and who's going to do it? Plan for tracking and reporting refrigerants. So what are we purchasing? What are we using? How are we repairing it? What are we disposing of? A plan and schedule for leak detection and managing. So what does that even mean and how are we doing that? A plan and schedule for evaluation and replacement. A policy for selling refrigerants. So if we have refrigerants, how will we sell them? What's the process of selling those? Annual evaluation and reporting, and staff training, because those of us that might be the project manager are not necessarily those of us that might be touching refrigerants or interacting with the refrigerants on a day-to-day. So who was part of this team? The DEC was the funder. New Yorkers for Cool Refrigerant Management was our sub under Sustainable Hudson Valley, and those two groups did all of those things that I just mentioned. Sustainable Hudson Valley did primarily the outreach, because this also included an incredible outreach component to the community, because most people don't talk about refrigerants on a daily basis. And different departments. So you might be thinking, well, who is even involved here? As I mentioned, the Sustainability Office, myself and Phil Shuttle Green, who's also on the call, we served as the grant writing team, grant managing, and project management. But Phil is also serving as the refrigerants manager for the city. Our DPW was involved because we needed to get involved with our fleet. Actually, all of our departments were involved in terms of assessing their fleet, but they really helped us out because they have the mechanics off space there. Our engineering office helped, and they are serving as our HVAC managers for this project and moving forward. And the mayor's office was a big part of this to help to bring everyone together. We also relied heavily on our Climate Smart Kingston Commission, our Conservation Advisory Council, which are 2 advisory boards here in the city, and then other external stakeholders like Climate Action Associates, E. Gartland and Associates LLC, and the Refrigerant Emissions Elimination Forum, who all provided some technical assistance at some point along the way. So what did the timeline look like? How long did this take you, Julie? We submitted the grant in July of 22. Remember, that was the 2022 CFA. So that was when that was due. This year in the summer, that will be your next round to a chance to do this. We were awarded in January. Okay, so 6 months later. We got a contract after that, 10 months later in October 2024. We did a consultant request for proposals in April and May of 25. We signed a contract with Sustainable Hudson Valley in July or June of 25. And the actual process of putting together this whole amazing plan went from June to November of 2025. So that's the inventory, conducting the inventory, the analysis of all of our policies and procedures, a draft of the plan, and the educational campaign. So that took half a year, a little over half a year. No, a little less, yeah, about half a year. We finalized the plan in December of this year. Staff training, after a couple tweaks that we needed to do, staff training is happening this spring. And we're doing refrigerant amnesty days for 5 years of this project. So that means right now, normally someone from the public wants to get rid of an air conditioner or a refrigerator, they pay the city $35 per unit to dispose of that. Well, we're holding at least one day a year where those fees are waived. So we're calling that Refrigerant Amnesty Day, and I'm using the funds from the grant to be able to support that. And by the way, that has been huge response and continuing to move forward, which will be in perpetuity. Ooh, yeah. And so this is what our refrigerators look like when we have a collection event. It's amazing. But I'm going to now pass it over to Michael, who's going to walk you through the work that was done. And then he'll be followed up by Phil with how is this going to move forward? We're good.
Well, thank you, Julie. Let me just take a minute to share my screen. You can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Great. So it's really an honor for me to be here today. I want to go back. So in 2017, I think people know that Project Drawdown named refrigerant management the #1 climate solution. And since then, I've been on a quest to figure out, well, how do you make that work? How do you make that information work for local organizations? It was a big honor for me to work with Julie Noble and the other staff members from Kingston on their refrigerants project, which helped me put a lot of what I've learned about refrigerant management into a report for non-specialists. Prior to the Kingston report, I also worked on an inventory for the village of Warwick, which has much fewer assets to inventory. So today we have representatives from big and small municipalities, and I trust everyone will learn something cool in today's webinar. Let's begin with a general introduction to refrigerants, then we'll discuss how concerned you should be about them, and then we'll review lessons from the different sections of our inventory and planning work, namely the buildings, automobiles, and appliances. So refrigerants are chemicals that play an essential role in refrigeration processes, in air conditioning and heat pumps. Pressures are applied and removed to cyclically change refrigerants back and forth between liquid and gas in a phase change process that captures heat from one place and moves it to another. Okay, but so what's so cool about that? Well, refrigerants are important. They're just nasty greenhouse gases, and I have a way I like to illustrate this. We all can relate to how a pint of beer or of ice cream weighs a pound. And if you burned a pound of gasoline, it would create a little over 3 pounds of carbon dioxide. But if a single pound of R410A, a very common refrigerant, was released to the environment, it will act like more than 4,700 pounds of carbon dioxide. That is, the 20-year global warming potential, or GWP, of R410A is 4,715. 1 pound of this refrigerant has the same carbon dioxide emissions as burning 241 gallons of gasoline. And now, carbon dioxide isn't the only greenhouse gas. So we use global warming potentials to calculate carbon dioxide equivalents. And this is at the heart of why refrigerant management is the #1 climate solution. Beyond greenhouse gases, there are other concerns from refrigerants, such as the ozone depleting qualities of CFCs that the Montreal Protocol was about. So this brings up the question, what's a CFC? And what are the other classes of refrigerants? The chlorofluorocarbons were patented molecules that had various configurations of chlorine, fluoride, and carbon atoms. Those are the ones that were terrible for the ozone layer. And these are three examples. Starting in the 1990s, the HCFCs added hydrogen molecules to various configurations, and later the HFCs had hydrogen, fluoride, and carbon atoms in various gourmet configurations, but they had no chlorine. Because the HFCs have no chlorine atoms, they do not lead to ozone depletion. There's also a relatively new class of refrigerants known as hydrofluoroolefins. These molecules have ultra-low global warming potentials, but they also break down into trifluoroacetic acid, or TFA, which unfortunately is a forever chemical. None of these molecules are naturally occurring substances. All were and some are still heavily patented. And this is the time to introduce the stars of today's show, the natural refrigerants. There are some refrigerants that are naturally occurring substances. Here are some examples and samples of how they're used. These all have ultra-low global warming potentials, although they can't be used for all circumstances where you'd want to use a refrigerant. The big picture goal of refrigerant management is to ensure that every molecule of synthetic refrigerant produced is prevented from leaking and eventually recovered and destroyed. While as much as possible, new equipment should use refrigerants with the lowest possible global warming potential and minimal other environmental impacts. In Project Drawdown, refrigerant management and alternative refrigerants are now treated as separate topics. This is why refrigerant management is no longer ranked as number one, but if the two were combined, it would be back at the top. Okay, with that general introduction to refrigerants, let's address this question. Are refrigerants of concern to your municipality? Jim Yeager of Climate Action Associates, who helps DEC create spreadsheets for compiling greenhouse gas inventories, said in the past that they found that inventorying refrigerants typically added only about 3% to an emissions inventory, but the work was really labor intensive. Yet he believed our highly granular work on the Kingston inventory demonstrated it's a good idea to look closely at your refrigerants. When we were starting the inventory, Julie asked the question, where are our refrigerants and what are they used for? Here in specific numbers and way too much detail for a PowerPoint slide is Kingston's refrigerant bank. Refrigerants are not consumed like fuels. They're used over and over again and only create greenhouse gases if they leak. Thus, the inventory we prepared focused equally on the refrigerant bank and on refrigerant emissions. The totals here, they show the 1,200 pounds of chemicals in Kingston's refrigerant bank have a CO2e, or carbon dioxide equivalent, of more than 2,500 metric tons on a 20-year time frame. Basically, it's Kingston's responsibility to all of us to manage those chemicals properly. And here's a broad overview of Kingston's refrigerant emissions. From the installed bank of refrigerants, most emissions were from motor vehicle air conditioning systems. There were also emissions from buildings. That's the light blue and light green slices of this pie, and especially the servers serving the largest buildings. Kingston also had substantial emissions from its program for transfer station appliances, and there will be slides later on each of these topics. What was the context of these numbers? How big is that? Is that bank big? Well, if this is Kingston's refrigerant bank, this proportionally represents their municipal emissions from the greenhouse gas inventory that they did in 2024. And this represents Kingston's total annual refrigerant emissions, or around 21% of total emissions found in their 2024 municipal inventory. From this illustration, we can get a general sense that the refrigerants are an important concern for municipalities. But there was also a single event that came out from 2023. We came across maintenance records of a leak that emitted 99 pounds of the refrigerant R22. On a 20-year time frame, each pound of R22 acts like 5,690 pounds of a carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide equivalent of this single event was 255 metric tons, or roughly 11% of Kingston's annual emissions. Do some of the municipalities represented here today potentially have the responsibility for similar leaks? Well, and as for the cost, the contractor didn't directly charge Kingston for the refrigerant that time, but contractors are charging around $125 per pound these days for R22. So the more refrigerants you have in working systems, the more important it is to understand that refrigerant prices are high these days, and by design, they will continue to rise. And why is that? Because of the AIM Act, or the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. This chart depicts the phase down of loud new refrigerant production in our country. For the last couple of years, only 60% of the 2019 baseline of production is allowed. With restrained supply, there's upward price pressure, which incentivizes the transition to lower GWP refrigerants, leak reduction efforts, and refrigerant recovery work. Everyone should be clear about this. The more your equipment relies on legacy refrigerants, the more you need to be prepared for expensive refrigerants in the years ahead. So for both ethical and financial reasons, it's important for municipalities to be aware of how refrigerants are used in their operations. Now let's start looking at the building refrigerant emissions, because this is where you'll find your largest volumes of refrigerants in one place. Here we discuss installed systems. Unlike window air conditioners and residential refrigerators, which can simply be plugged in and will start working, installed systems require on-site installation. These systems are not factory sealed, and they require field craftsmanship. This greatly increases the possibilities of leaks. Whether or not you do a formal refrigerant inventory or set up a formal refrigerant management plan, for climate reasons and financial reasons, depending on the size of your facilities, you may need someone who can serve as the HVACR manager, that's the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration manager, such as we appointed in Kingston. Such a person would have the expertise to oversee regulatory requirements, maintenance and upgrades, and whether contractors are following best practices. Is your municipality subject to any refrigerant regulations? In general, if the only air conditioning and heat pump equipment you have looks like the equipment in this picture, you don't have any specific regulatory concerns. But if you have chillers or rooftop units or other large equipment, maybe a large refrigeration equipment such as for a cafeteria, someone from your municipality probably needs to be aware of the EPA regulations and possibly New York's Part 494 regulations. If any single piece of equipment has more than 15 pounds of refrigerant, there are 8 EPA rules to follow regarding record keeping and reporting if it has excessive leaks. New York State also has a special set of regulations known as Part 494, and this table gives a very simple overview of those requirements. Basically, anyone who has equipment with large amounts of refrigerants has a large responsibility to the rest of us to manage that well. Our Part 484 regulations require refrigerant users to register their systems with the state. That's way beyond what they do for the national level. You have to register it with the state. And for the medium-sized and largest systems, you have to annually report how much refrigerant has been added to the system and so forth. The DEC has done whole webinars on this topic, and it's easy to find their webinars, and there's also FAQs that the DEC has provided to explain these. Then when you do a thorough building inventory, you look at each installed system and compile data from the specs labels. You also need to review all maintenance records for each piece of equipment. In this process, you may learn that some departments haven't even had regular maintenance performed, and they may also appreciate expert help with that. Perhaps they'll need help with selecting new equipment. Someone should be around to oversee contractors to make sure they were following best practices, such as recovering refrigerant whenever possible and recording all amounts of refrigerants recovered from or charged into equipment. And that applies even to working on the smaller equipment that has no other overhanging regulations. Oh, sorry, I want to step back a second. I like telling guests at Zoom webinars that it's an all-you-can-eat and drink event, but we only have time to discuss so much today's lunch and learn. In preparing today's menu, I had to leave a few really delectable dishes on a side menu. If you get a copy of the report, I'm confident you'll hungrily digest all of the gourmet details. But back to the main menu. If you've inventoried the refrigerants in your installed systems, you would know which regulations you are subject to, whether maintenance and upgrades are needed, and what financial liabilities you may have. You also would have figured out whether you can fill this role for your municipality or whether there's someone else with more expertise who should be doing it. Okay, now let's turn to motor vehicles. Next time you get in your car, take a moment to pop open the trunk or the frunk and find the refrigerant label. For this vehicle, it was found on the hood itself, but in many vehicles, it's about where you see that star just inside. The refrigerants used in motor vehicles can lead to substantial amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, so they're definitely worth studying. Nowadays, there are only two refrigerants used in motor vehicles, R134A and R1234YF. The latter one is an HFO that has ultra-low global warming potential, but it breaks down into TFA, a forever chemical. Before 2015, all vehicles used R134A, but since then, nearly all new light-duty vehicles have transitioned over to R1234YF. Meanwhile, heavy-duty vehicles are scheduled to switch over by 2028, although no manufacturers have done that yet. If you want a shortcut to inventory refrigerants in a vehicle fleet or to cut emissions, I suggest focusing on the heavy-duty vehicles. In Kingston, heavy-duty vehicles only comprise 28% of the entire fleet, but their refrigerants amount to nearly half of the MVAC refrigerant bank. And as far as emissions, they were responsible for 83% of them. Fire trucks, garbage trucks, buses, ambulances, and other heavy-duty vehicles, they have larger refrigerant charges, and they also tend to have higher leak rates and leak more easily. So what can we do about MVAC emissions? There are federal requirements for repair shops to track the refrigerant use. It's important for your municipal garage to track all refrigerant purchases, plus keep a detailed log of MVAC repairs. Each garage should have an RRR machine. That stands for Recovery, Recycle, and Recharge. It automatically does these, kind of like cooking rice with an automatic rice cooker instead of doing on a stovetop. It's much more efficient and it reduces emissions while saving money and time. So this equipment, it automatically recovers the refrigerant and oil from the vehicle's AC system. It filters and cleans what was recovered and recharges the system with the exact amount of refrigerant and oil required. It also pressure tests the system before recharging, which is one of the proactive measures that can be used to reduce leaks. Lastly, everyone who works on MVAC in a municipal garage should have their Section 609 EPA certification. Lots of shops just have one or two people certified who then are allowed to purchase refrigerant tanks for the shop, but the regs say everyone who does the work should be certified. And the last piece, for the Kingston report, we inventoried 181 appliances, and their refrigerant comprised just 5% of the total refrigerant bank. Moreover, those appliances are factory sealed and rarely leak refrigerants. If they've stopped working, it's usually because of another reason. So they basically contributed very little, they contributed nothing to our refrigerant emissions inventory. As far as buying new window air conditioners and refrigerators, everything on the market today uses the most climate-friendly refrigerants that are allowed, so there are no refrigerant-based choices to consider when purchasing that kind of new equipment. So there's not much work to do with appliances you own, but there's very important public service to perform with an appliance recycling program. So Kingston accepts appliances at its transfer station, and in the past, those appliances were sold to West Kingston Recycling based on scrap metal rates. We asked West Kingston what they did with those appliances. And the concern was that maybe in the dark of night they were just sort of letting the refrigerants go and then separating all the metals and selling them as scrap metal. But what we learned, they were very open with us, was that they shrink wrap them onto pallets and sell them to a middleman, such as the Double Wind Company, which loads them onto container ships and sends them to scrapyards in Asian countries. We could not find any evidence that anyone recovered the refrigerant. Now, I want to say I was unsure whether or how to explain this in the Kingston report, and I'm really pleased to say that Kingston's sustainability coordinator, Julie, and the mayor wanted to do the noble thing and tell the truth. So we used data from coolest recycling drives to estimate these emissions that the city is taking responsibility for. I want to say, ouch, but also I really hope everyone sees in this a huge opportunity for municipalities of all sizes. In Warwick, we started hosting coolest recycling drives in 2023, and since then I've worked with Kingston, New Paltz, Woodbury, and others to hold similar events. These drives make it free and convenient for residents and businesses to get rid of their to get rid of their worn out appliances. We inventory each appliance that comes in, and the data helps set up conversations with citizens such as, if the 21 ounces of the chemical refrigerants in your air conditioner escape to the atmosphere, it would have the same greenhouse gas effect as burning 390 gallons of gasoline. Over the years, we've compiled data on over 1,300 appliances, and based on that data, we can say recovering the refrigerants from 100 appliances can prevent the emissions of more than 80 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And the net cost of recycling 100 appliances is under $500. Because appliance recycling is such an inexpensive way to prevent the emissions of so much greenhouse gases, I'm really hoping that the Climate Smart Communities program will make appliance recycling one of the high impact actions. In a robust appliance program, it would be clear who's recovering the refrigerants, that the recovery personnel are paid well to do a thorough job, that recovered amounts are recorded and converted to CO2e and publicly announced and like celebrated. Like this is a lot that it's a big impact for everyone. There should also be publicity, such as these refrigerator magnets, and which should emphasize the importance of appliance recycling. Moreover, the program should develop strategies for getting more and more appliances, including reasonable pricing throughout the year. So in a quick summary, here are the priority steps for inventory and acting on your refrigerant management responsibilities. For installed systems, assess all of your equipment and find the right person to serve as HVAC manager for your assets. For motor vehicles, at least inventory all the heavy-duty vehicles and encourage your garage to track refrigerant purchases and proactively prevent leaks. And for appliances, a robust appliance recycling program is a very inexpensive way to prevent emissions, and it's something every municipality should be doing for its residents. I hope you've learned things today that will help you reduce your refrigerant emissions. In the next couple of months, I'll be starting on a refrigerants inventory for the town of Warwick, and Sustainable Hudson Valley, whose mission is to speed up, scale up, and jazz up projects like this, will be helping me organize a cohort of municipalities to do the same. If you have interest in learning more about that or any other questions about my presentation today, please get in touch. And now over to you, Phil.
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, you're all set.
Excellent. So thank you, Julie and Michael, for those presentations. Mine's going to be really short. I'm just going to try and walk us through a little bit how we're going to implement the plan that we developed over the past year. So my name is Philip Shuttle Green. I'm the environmental specialist with the City of Kingston. Let's see. All right. So first, a shout out to Jessica DuPont, who is on this webinar, but her face will not be shown except for in this picture. She now is the special projects coordinator for Sustainable Hudson Valley, but during this project was really critical in doing refrigerants inventory work. So here she is looking at an AC unit, tracking what refrigerants are in there and the volume of those refrigerants, or I guess the weight of those refrigerants. But let's now look to Kingston's implementation team, because I think we probably sort of you guys are getting a feel for this through Michael and Julie's presentations that it's actually there's a few real big players in terms of where the refrigerants are leaking in a municipality, and they tend to have a few people who sort of have the oversight to manage those refrigerants. So the first person I want to introduce is Ryan Kuhn. He's DPW's deputy superintendent, and he's our go-to guy for everything happening at the transfer station. So that massive amount of uh, refrigerant emissions that Michael was just talking about, Ryan's our guy in solving that problem. So in the bottom left of this screen, I just have a pie chart, which is the same as the one that Michael was just showing the metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions in 2025 that are related to refrigerants in the city of Kingston. And Ryan's responsibility really is to deal with that big part, almost half of the circle that's outlined in red right there. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to contract with a certified refrigerants reclamation company to come to our transfer station before we sell off the white goods for scrap metal and have them extract all of the refrigerants that are within the appliances. Then those refrigerants will go on to be reused somewhere else, and hopefully those people also recycle them. Next person, Francis Fagan. He is the DPW garage foreman, and he's the manager of the big garage that deals with the vast majority of our heavy duty vehicles. Looking at that little the little pie chart down at the bottom left, we see that his responsibility is over a quarter of the greenhouse gas emissions related to refrigerants. And here we have an action shot with him using that RRR machine to work on an AC unit in this big old pickup truck. Then, last but not least, or maybe I believe this is last, well, second to last, we have Bradley Borquist, who is an engineering aide with the new title of HVAC manager. So his role is going to be installing leak detection systems, upgrading the HVAC in all of the city's buildings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of interesting with regards to refrigerants management because in the end, there are actually only a few people who have the oversight to really make those changes. So my role as the final person, as I'm the environmental specialist, but I'm also the refrigerants inventory manager, is to try and nag these people, or maybe support them is a better way to say it, to to be proactive about dealing with our refrigerants in the city. And this is me going into the city of Kingston's bomb shelter to check out some dehumidifiers we have down there. No, it's like a water pump or something like that. But probably the most exciting part of the whole inventory. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you for the shout out. I think my favorite part, no, I know my favorite part of the inventory was going to the waste management facility and meeting George, the goldfish. Um, so thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Jessica DuPont, as the Special Projects Coordinator with Sustainable Hudson Valley. And my organization, we were heavily involved with the planning of refrigerant inventory, social media, and community outreach components of the project. And if I were to use one sentence of what we do, it's we like to foster high impact community projects like this one and help accelerate climate action throughout the Hudson Valley. So now I'm going to paste a link in the chat to a very quick survey gauging municipal interest in completing a project like this and just to see what is actually out there, who's actually working on what. So we ask that you please fill this out and also send it to anybody you think who might be interested in learning more. We will now be opening up for Q&A if anyone has any questions for the team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. So I do see two questions in the chat that we'll get to in a moment. And I just want to let everyone know that I will be posting the recording of this webinar and the slides to HVRC's website later today. And I'll send out an email to everyone to make sure that you all have access to this great information. Um, but so the first question that I see in the chat is a two-part question. So one is, are there any specific regulations or practices to which New York State-based school districts are subject since they are not under laws of most municipalities? And then the second part of that question, when the consumer does not recycle directly, do we need to educate consumers specifically to seek out appliance dealers who recycle refrigerants when the installer takes away the old home appliances, or is this required statewide?
I'll take the first one. There are no special rules for municipalities. The state rules, the federal rules, they apply to schools. Anybody who owns and if you have a school system, I hope you have a big air conditioning system, especially on a day like today. Um, and you need to understand like what are your chemicals there and just how much responsibility do you have? That's an important question for a school district to know. And the second question, if it's something like an installed heat pump or central air conditioning thing, it's on the is for the contractor to recover the refrigerant before they take it out. If it's something like a simple window air conditioner unit, then they typically have to take it somewhere. A refrigerator, a lot of times when they're bringing a new one, they'll take the old one away. But if it's otherwise those consumer appliances, not the installed systems, it's on the consumer to try to get that to a good spot, and it's challenging because scrap metal dealers look at it and see, oh, there's metal there, and they'll like collectors and trucks and so forth will like to throw it on their truck and do things. So that's an important thing to do is communicate with your residents about we really need to get you have them directly from you to us so this properly recovered.
And I just want to also add to that, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you're sitting on this call and saying, well, I don't have I have a small community. We don't have all these other things that Kingston has. You probably have a grocery store, and grocery stores are big managers of refrigerants. And so that's a kind of thing you might be thinking about. What can your community do to help maybe educate your grocery store locally that, maybe they should be more responsible with their refrigerants. Is that true, right, Michael?
Exactly. Exactly. One thing you could do is ask your grocery store in town, have you folks registered with the DEC under Part 494? Because not everybody does. People don't. As a matter of fact, if your school district has a more than 200 pounds of refrigerant in your air conditioning system, you should already be registered with the DEC. But I would guess, I would bet there are school districts in New York State who have no idea they're supposed to be doing that, and businesses.
All right, great. Thank you so much for those answers. The next question in the chat is for Julie and Phil. How did you come up with the idea of a refrigerant amnesty day, and what is the substantive impact of this service? And has the service been able to capture refrigerants from large units?
Phil, do you want to take that one or you want me to take it?
I could start. So we just had an Earth Fair, which was great. It was rainy, but people still came and dropped off a bunch of white goods like refrigerators and AC units and things like that. Michael was there to catalog them. Um, and that was, I guess we could say, our first amnesty day where people were able to drop these off without having to pay anything. I'm sure Julie has plans for other ones. But what's nice with it is that through that kind of a system, not only are people not having to pay the $35 that the city of Kingston charges to dispose of the white goods, but also it gives us the ability to anticipate when we're going to get a bunch of stuff. So we have an amnesty day. We can expect that we're going to get 100 some odd good like white goods. Then we can call in advance to the refrigerants reclamation company, and they can arrive on time to get that stuff, and we can get it out of our transfer station as quickly as possible. So it's a nice it works well, I think.
Agreed. And I would just add, the $35 is a lot. And we have just also been finding people just dumping outside of town or around town, if they don't want driving up to DPW, finding out it's $35 and then saying, I'll go get rid of it somewhere else. Well, somewhere else is like the side of the road somewhere. And so we still have to go and pick it up. And so we don't call it Amnesty Day publicly. That's just like the term that we use, that I use internally. Like I consider it amnesty. But it is really helpful. And like Phil said, getting it all at one time is helpful too. Although we collect them all year round, but this gives us a guaranteed like lot all at one time. And we collect e-waste year round too, but we give people a day to recycle e-waste and suddenly we get trucks and trucks full of it because I think people just need a nudge.
Awesome. All right. And then second part of that question for Michael, how many pounds of refrigerants are in the average heavy duty vehicle, and what is the carbon dioxide equivalent for those refrigerants?
It's 5 or 6 pounds or above. Um, some things like buses could use like 12 pounds of R134A. And I just looked it up in the report. I opened a copy of the report to find this, so you could look this up yourself. But the 20-year global warming potential of R134A is 5,690. The other thing is when we did the inventory, we we couldn't like for like the chiller system at City Hall. We could get the maintenance records, and we knew, oh, this is how much had been put uh, into the system over time. So we knew, well, this is how much it leaked. So you know that. There were some heat pumps there were no maintenance records for. So for those, we had to find, well, what's an estimated leak rate? We knew the exact amount in it, but what's the estimated leak rate? For the vehicles, we had to use the estimated leak rates for everything. And some of them we went to specifically to each vehicle and looked under the hood or the frunk, um, and and found the exact amounts in there. Others we found online sources to saying for particular makes and models. But when it came to estimating emissions, they said for passenger vehicles, it's like a 7% annual leak rate. And for heavy duty vehicles, it's like a 33% leak rate. And actually, the the fire department uh, has one man who does their MVAC work, and and his actual leak rate we knew specifically for all the fire department it was 34%. So the 33% is not like off. It's easy for those huge pieces of equipment to have leaks.
And I also just want to contribute something else that I don't know if Phil had mentioned this, but there was other sort of side bonus things that came out of this project, like improving our fleet inventory, which was not an intended part of this grant necessarily, but literally Phil and Jess and Michael had to find every vehicle that the city owns. And even if you own 10 vehicles in your municipality, or if you own 2,200 vehicles, if they're not all parked in one place, which they're probably not, uh, they had to go to the scrapyard to look, vehicles that are still in our possession but are at a scrapyard. Or, what constitute a vehicle? If pieces are getting pulled off of it, like, is that still a vehicle? So all these different things have really helped us, so many additional bonus things that we didn't really even think about when we were setting out to do this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those answers and that insight. I think that's great. A lot of things with planning and inventorying can really help just, yeah, discover all of those different things and make planning overall just better for communities and like be able to take those next steps. All right. Next question is related to geothermal or ground source heat pumps. Does geothermal heating and cooling have worrisome chemicals?
That's a great question. And so first, a ground source heat pump will use less refrigerant to do the same job as an air source heat pump. So your refrigerant bank is smaller. And secondly, most times in ground source heat pumps, there are factory sealed units. So you don't have somebody getting on site and connecting the refrigerant pipes, which means they're much less likely to leak. At the end of the day, they still have like the R410A in it or one of the newer A2Ls. Um, um, so you want to make sure you recover at the end of its life, but it can work through 25 years and never leak. So yes, they have them. It's much less than air source heat pumps.
Awesome. All right. Then the next question for Kingston's greenhouse gas inventory, were refrigerants from transfer station collection a part of the government operations greenhouse gas emissions inventory or community scale greenhouse gas emissions inventory?
I can take that one. So the last uh, municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventory was done before we completed this project, and we didn't include it. And I think we'll have to decide whether to include it in future ones because I think it would fall under scope 3 emissions, which this is getting sort of nerdy, but um, that's we don't really include scope 3 emissions. Like we don't talk about our waste, like, and other whatever other thing, like how much greenhouse gas emissions come from the paper that we purchase, those kinds of things. So we'd have to talk about that. It seems like I think we will want to bring it up because we'll be recovering those refrigerants. But I guess one other thing I would say that's sort of complicated um, is with the recovery side of things. When we recover from appliances that go to the transfer station, is we're not destroying those refrigerants. So it becomes a complicated question of whether we can claim that as like emissions avoided or just emissions like passed down the line. But I guess,
I
sorry,
tried to,
short answer is we did not include it in our municipal.
um, but in the report, I sort of wrote it up so that there was the emissions from the refrigerant bank, and then so that's the buildings and the vehicles. But then there's the transfer station appliances, which the city of Kingston sort of had responsibility for. And at the end of the day, whether it's in the inventory or not, we're trying to reduce these emissions, right? So it's good to know that they're there and that there's something that can be done about it.
Awesome. And yeah, I will say in the spreadsheet template that Hudson Valley Regional Council has for government operations greenhouse gas inventory, there is a refrigerants tab if you're interested in incorporating that into your inventory. All right. Next question is, why is it so easy for systems to leak? Is there any effort to require manufacturers to create more leak-proof systems?
The bigger the system and the older it is, the more likely it is to leak. When you get up to like commercial refrigeration, they have an accepted leak rate. An accepted leak rate is 20% annually. And each pound of that refrigerant, so you have 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of refrigerant, each pound acts like 7,000 pounds of CO2 if it gets to the atmosphere, and it's acceptable if it leaks up to 20%. For the comfort cooling systems like they have in Kingston, 10% is the acceptable leak rate. It's just so I heard one person say, an engineer, you might look at it and say, why does it leak? But a refrigerant engineer would look at it and say, well, why wouldn't it leak? It's just the systems are so big and there's so many connections and vibrations and temperature variations. And so, yeah, there is pressure on manufacturers to reduce leaks, and air conditioners don't. Window air conditioners don't. At our most recent coolest recycling drive, um, somebody from IRRI came to do the refrigerant recovery. I liked it because he was paid by the hour, so he didn't want to cut a time short. He also got a bonus for the amount of refrigerant he covered. The more he recovered, he got more. So I really like that from working with IRRI. But he got to the end of recovering refrigerants from 185 appliances, and he said only 2 were flat. Only 2 had no refrigerant in them. But those are factory sealed units. So when you go from that to like a rack system that works at a big supermarket, it's just the opportunity for leaks greatly increase.
Great. Okay. And we have 2 more questions in the chat, which I think we have time. We have about 4 minutes left. So the next question is, are there best practices for reducing the leaks from heavy duty vehicles?
This is something I wish I knew more about. Um, um, I think using that RRR machine is a very good thing to do because it will pressure test before you put anything back in. Um, and also, if you sort of try, if I'm going to say is if mechanics prioritize that, it's just that they've got dozens of things they want to prioritize, right? But if somebody really wants to prioritize it, You can check more frequently with your leak detectors for smaller leaks, especially in the heavy-duty vehicles. You don't have to do it on your whole fleet, but especially on the heavy-duty vehicles. Test more often with refrigerant leak detectors. If any work needs to be done, use an RRR machine. I think there are, I wish I had a better answer on that, but there are some things you can do.
All right. And then final question that I see in the chat, it's kind of a multi-part question, but what percentage of the DEC grant award went or will go to the refrigerant amnesty days? And can you quantify approximately how many days will be hosted through that funding? And then can you share any stats for collection for the first event and insights of the obstacles for businesses and residents to responsibly dispose of appliances with refrigerants?
I can start with that. I actually haven't gotten the numbers yet from the Earth Day from Michael, so I'm not sure how many we got this year. But I will say this is the second Earth Fair or third maybe that we've been collecting these. And so we consider all of those to be amnesty days for the life of the grant and will continue to go. We kind of just said, all right, well, how many do we think we'll get times $35 times 5 years? So the grant was currently set up or is currently set up to do one event a year. And we felt like it was most valuable to push this effort into an existing system. So we, as in the city, don't have a standalone just refrigerant recycling day, although last Saturday we had a paint only recycling day, so I can't really sit here and say that we don't do that. But we already have the system set up at the Earth Fair, which is a huge, many thousand people event where they're coming and they can drop off e-waste, they can do paper shredding, and they can drop off their refrigerants. And that way we kind of pull it all in on one day, like Phil said before, then we can get them all recycled on one day, move them all at one time. So I would say grant what percentage wise, it was less than a quarter of the grant towards the amnesty days. But you kind of have to gauge that based on like how many people do you have, how much do you charge? I mean, ideally out of this, we would charge less than $35 and more reflective of what we actually pay. We also found that out, like $35 just seems to be this random arbitrary number that's not really actually affiliated with how much we pay for it. So the number of days might increase as we continue to go. But for stats, I don't know. Michael, do you remember any of the past years or do you know this year's numbers?
I sent it to Phil recently. I think he
Oh,
has.
Yeah, I've got
This
it up
year's.
here. So it was we got 32. It was a rainy day, so not the biggest haul this year. But that amounts to 54 metric tons of CO2 equivalent if you're looking at 20-year global warming potential. So that's a lot.
and
That's like 5 people's yearly emissions or something like that, or
I
4
think last year
people's.
we got twice as many as that.
It was rainy and chilly and not a good day to be out running the air conditioners around. If people can stay 1 minute more, look on ny4cool.org for our coolest recycling drive information or the Sustainable Warwick site for coolest recycling drive. So what we do is we're volunteer events and so Sustainable Warwick has funded it here in Warwick for the last few years. You have to pay, like, for us, it's $9 per appliance for IRRI to come in and do the work. I think for municipalities who have ongoing programs, it's $12 per appliance. But simple things like when we get the appliance, we cut the cords off. For one reason, it makes it safer to move them around. People don't trip. And for another reason, we got to end up paying like 55 cents per cord. We took them all to as a separate waste stream to Sims Metal Recycling, got paid 55 cents a cord. If you can open some of them and get the evaporators and condensers out, you can get paid $5 a piece for those. So $5 a piece, and there's like 2 in each one, each appliance. So it's possible to really offset your costs and have it very low cost. You may need some labor involved, and as volunteers, all our hours are priceless, but we don't have direct labor charges.
All right, awesome. I think that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much to our presenters. That was really informative, and I hope everyone on the call learned a lot. And I will send a follow-up email with recordings and the slides and all of that once it finishes processing on Zoom and all those things. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.